Marcus Hayes stood at the security checkpoint of the naval base, his dress uniform crisp despite the 3-hour drive from Washington. The young petty officer behind the desk squinted at his identification, then at a clipboard that seemed to hold the weight of the world. "I'm sorry, sir, but your name isn't on the guest list for today's ceremony," the sailor said, his voice apologetic but firm. Marcus felt his stomach drop. His younger brother David was being promoted to captain today, a milestone they'd both dreamed about since childhood when they'd play Navy in their backyard in Ohio. "There has to be some mistake," Marcus said, keeping his voice steady despite the growing knot in his chest. "I'm his brother. Captain David Hayes is my family." The petty officer checked again, running his finger down the list with painful slowness. "I see a lot of Hayes family members here, but no Marcus Hayes, sir. I'm really sorry, but without authorization, I can't let you through." Marcus pulled out his phone, trying David's number for the 5th time that morning. Straight to voicemail. He'd driven through the night to be here, had requested leave from his own posting, had even bought a new tie specifically for this moment. The irony wasn't lost on him that, as a rear admiral in the Coast Guard, he was being denied entry to watch his Navy brother's promotion. "Can you call someone?" Marcus asked. "There's got to be a supervisor or—" "Admiral Hayes." The voice came from behind him, crisp and authoritative. Marcus turned to see a tall woman in navy dress blues approaching, her captain's insignia catching the morning light. "I'm Captain Rodriguez, the ceremony coordinator. There seems to be some confusion." Marcus felt a flicker of hope. "Yes, ma'am. I'm here for my brother's promotion ceremony, but apparently—" "You're not on the list," she finished, but her expression was knowing rather than apologetic. "Admiral, would you mind waiting in the visitors' lounge for just a few minutes? I need to make a quick call." Something in her tone suggested this wasn't the disaster it appeared to be. Marcus nodded, following her directions to a small waiting area overlooking the harbor. Through the windows, he could see the ceremony setup on the pier below, rows of white chairs, a small stage with microphones, and Navy personnel moving about in final preparations. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife Sarah. "How's the ceremony? Send pictures." Marcus stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How do you tell your wife that your own brother forgot to put you on the guest list for one of the most important days of his career? 20 minutes passed. Marcus checked his watch repeatedly, worried the ceremony would start without him there to witness it. He and David had been through everything together. Their father's death when David was still in high school, their mother's long illness, the years when Marcus had essentially raised his younger brother while juggling his own military career. The waiting room door opened, and Captain Rodriguez returned, this time with a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Admiral Hayes, if you'd please follow me. There's been a development. Captain Rodriguez led Marcus through a maze of corridors he didn't recognize, moving deeper into the administrative section of the base. Her pace was brisk but not urgent, and she kept glancing at her watch as if timing their journey precisely. "Ma'am, I don't want to miss the ceremony," Marcus said, as they turned down another hallway lined with official portraits of distinguished naval officers. "It starts in 15 minutes. "Don't worry, Admiral. You won't miss anything important," she replied, her tone carrying that same mysterious confidence from earlier. "In fact, I think you'll find today quite memorable." They stopped at a door marked Base Commander's Office. Captain Rodriguez knocked twice, then opened it without waiting for a response. "Admiral Hayes is here, sir." Marcus stepped inside to find a spacious office overlooking the ceremonial pier. Behind a large mahogany desk sat a man with silver eagles on his collar, Captain William Morrison, the base commander. But what caught Marcus's attention was the figure standing by the window, also in dress blues, also facing away. "Marcus," the figure said, turning around with a grin that Marcus had known for 35 years. David Hayes looked every inch the naval officer he'd become, but his eyes held the same mischievous glint from their childhood. "What the hell is going on?" Marcus asked, confusion mixing with relief at seeing his brother. "I wasn't on the list, they wouldn't let me in, and now—" "Sit down, big brother," David said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs facing the commander's desk. "We need to talk." Captain Morrison stood, extending his hand to Marcus. "Admiral Hayes, it's an honor. Your reputation in the Coast Guard precedes you. Please make yourself comfortable." Marcus shook the offered hand but remained standing, his eyes moving between his brother and the base commander. "Someone want to explain why I just spent half an hour thinking I was going to miss my brother's promotion because of some administrative screw-up?" David exchanged a look with Captain Morrison, then broke into a smile that reminded Marcus of the time 12-year-old David had convinced him to help build a treehouse, only to reveal he'd already gotten their mother's permission and recruited half the neighborhood kids to help. "There was no screw-up," David said. "You weren't on the guest list because guests don't usually participate in the ceremony itself." Participate. Marcus felt like he was missing some crucial piece of information. "David, what are you talking about?" Captain Morrison opened a folder on his desk and pulled out an official-looking document. "Admiral Hayes, your brother requested that you be the one to administer his oath and pin on his new rank. It's somewhat unusual, given that you're Coast Guard rather than Navy, but given your seniority and family relationship, the request was approved through channels." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. In all his years of military service, In all the ceremonies he'd attended, he'd never heard of anything quite like this. Brothers serving in different branches, one administering the other's promotion oath. It was the kind of thing that happened maybe once in a generation. "You want me to?" Marcus started, then stopped, his throat suddenly tight with emotion. "I want my big brother, the guy who taught me how to tie my shoes and helped me with my Naval Academy application, to be the one who promotes me to captain," David said simply. "If you're willing." Marcus looked at his brother, really looked at him. Somewhere along the way, the scared kid who'd cried the night before leaving for Annapolis had become this confident officer standing before him. But the request, the gesture, was pure David, thoughtful, surprising, and designed to honor the bond that had carried them both through their military careers. "The ceremony starts in 10 minutes, Captain Morrison said gently. "What do you say, Admiral?" Marcus stared at the oath card Captain Morrison had placed in his hands, the words blurring slightly as the magnitude of the moment settled over him. He'd administered oaths before, plenty of them, but never to family, never to the little brother who used to steal his baseball cards and follow him around like a shadow. "I need a minute," Marcus said, his voice rougher than he intended. He walked to the window overlooking the pier, where approximately 200 naval personnel and family members were taking their seats. Sarah would have loved to see this, he thought. She'd always said David was lucky to have someone who believed in him so completely. "You know," David said, joining him at the window, "I almost didn't ask you." "Why not?" "Because I was scared you'd say no." David's admission hung in the air between them. "I know we don't talk as much as we should. I know you've got your own command, your own responsibilities, and asking a Coast Guard admiral to participate in a Navy ceremony. It's not exactly conventional." Marcus turned to face his brother fully. "David, do you remember what you told me the night before you left for the academy?" David shook his head. "You said you were terrified you weren't good enough, that everyone else would be smarter, faster, better prepared. And I told you that Hayes men don't quit. We don't back down, and we sure as hell don't let fear make our decisions for us." "I remember now," David said quietly. "You've made captain in the United States Navy. You've served on 3 deployments, commanded a destroyer, and earned the respect of everyone in your chain of command. But more than that, you've become the kind of man Dad would be proud of. The kind of man I'm proud to call my brother." Captain Morrison cleared his throat gently. "Gentlemen, we should head down. The ceremony is about to begin." As they walked toward the door, David caught Marcus's arm. "There's one more thing. I didn't just ask you here to do the honors. I asked you here because I need to apologize." Marcus paused. "For what?" "For not being the brother you deserved. for being so focused on my own career that I forgot to stay connected to the person who made it possible, for not calling enough, for missing your promotion to Rear Admiral, for David. Marcus's voice was firm but gentle. Brothers don't keep score. We show up when it matters, and we're both here now. They made their way downstairs and toward a side entrance to the ceremonial area. Marcus could hear the low murmur of conversation from the assembled crowd, punctuated by the occasional sharp command as the ceremony participants took their positions. Captain Rodriguez appeared beside them, carrying two small boxes. "Admiral Hayes, Captain Hayes, these are for you." She handed Marcus a box containing David's new captain's insignia and gave David a small American flag. "For the photos afterward," she explained. As they approached the entrance to the pier, Marcus felt the familiar pre-ceremony butterflies he'd experienced countless times in his own career. But this was different. This wasn't about him. It was about celebrating someone he'd watched grow from a boy into a man, from a frightened midshipman into a naval officer ready for his next level of responsibility. "Ready?" David asked. Marcus looked at his brother, really looked at him. The nervous energy was still there, but it was tempered now with confidence and maturity. This was David's moment, but somehow Marcus realized it was his too. "Ready," Marcus said and meant it. The ceremony coordinator stepped forward to lead them out, and Marcus squared his shoulders, preparing to walk onto the pier where 200 people waited to witness something that neither brother would ever forget. The moment Marcus stepped onto the pier, he understood why David had orchestrated this surprise. The assembled crowd wasn't just naval personnel and random family members. It was a carefully curated gathering of people who had shaped both their lives. In the front row, he spotted Mrs. Patterson, their elderly neighbor who had driven them to school when their mother was too sick. 3 rows back, Commander Sarah Chen from his own Coast Guard unit had somehow made the trip. Even Father Miguel from their childhood parish was there, now considerably grayer, but wearing the same warm smile Marcus remembered from Sunday services. "How long have you been planning this?" Marcus asked quietly as they walked toward the small stage. 6 months, David admitted. Captain Morrison helped coordinate getting everyone here without spoiling the surprise. The ceremony began with the traditional formalities, the reading of orders, the acknowledgement of David's current service record, and a brief speech from Captain Morrison about leadership and the responsibilities of command. Marcus found himself studying his brother's posture, the way David held himself with quiet confidence as his accomplishments were read aloud. When Morrison finished, he gestured toward Marcus. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce Rear Admiral Marcus Hayes, United States Coast Guard, who will administer today's oath of office." The applause was warm and sustained. Marcus stepped forward, feeling the weight of 200 pairs of eyes, but more than that, feeling the weight of history, their family's history, their shared history. The moment when everything their father had taught them about service and sacrifice was being passed from one brother to the other. "Captain Hayes," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly across the pier, "please raise your right hand and repeat after me." David's hand came up, steady and sure. Marcus looked into his brother's eyes, the same dark brown eyes that had looked up at him trustingly so many times over the years, and began the oath that would formally recognize David's new rank and responsibilities. "I, David Michael Hayes, do solemnly swear." "I, David Michael Hayes, do solemnly swear." The words continued, each phrase a building block in the foundation of David's new role. Marcus found himself thinking about their father, who had served as a Navy petty officer in Vietnam and had always dreamed of seeing his sons become officers. He died when David was still in high school, but somehow Marcus felt his presence here, in this moment, in the pride that seemed to radiate from everyone assembled. When the oath was complete, Marcus opened the small box containing David's new insignia. The captain's eagles caught the sunlight, gleaming silver against the blue of the presentation box. This was the moment David had worked toward for 15 years, through academy stress and deployments, and the countless small sacrifices that military life demanded. "By the authority vested in me," Marcus said, his voice stronger now, "and with great personal pride, I hereby promote you to the rank of Captain, United States Navy." He removed David's lieutenant commander's insignia and carefully pinned the captain's eagles to his brother's collar. The crowd erupted in applause, but Marcus barely heard it. He was focused entirely on David's face, on the mixture of pride and emotion and gratitude that made his brother look, for just a moment, like the kid who used to beg to wear Marcus's old military surplus jacket. "Congratulations, Captain Hayes," Marcus said formally, then stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Dad would be so proud." David's eyes filled with tears. He quickly blinked away. "He'd be proud of both of us." They embraced, briefly, formally, but with an intensity that spoke to everything they'd been through together. When they separated, Marcus was surprised to realize his own eyes were damp. The formal ceremony concluded with the traditional first salute, where David, as a newly promoted captain, received salutes from junior officers and returned them with the gravity his new rank demanded. Marcus watched from the side, noting how naturally David had stepped into this new level of authority, how the extra weight of responsibility seemed to settle on his shoulders like a uniform he'd been waiting his whole career to wear. As the crowd began to disperse for the reception, Mrs. Patterson made her way over to them, moving slowly but determinedly through the maze of folding chairs. "Marcus Hayes, "You look just like your father in that uniform," she said, reaching up to adjust his tie with the familiarity of someone who had essentially been their third parent. "And David, Captain Hayes now, my goodness. I remember when you two used to build forts in my backyard and pretend you were soldiers." "We were playing Navy," David corrected with a grin. "Marcus was always the Admiral even then." "Some things never change," Mrs. Patterson said, then lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Though I have to say, David, this was much better than that surprise birthday party you threw for Marcus when you were 12. At least this time nobody ended up with cake in their hair." Marcus laughed, remembering. David had tried to surprise him with a party but had forgotten to invite anyone except their next-door neighbor's dog. They'd ended up eating an entire chocolate cake by themselves, while the dog watched hopefully from the kitchen floor. "Mrs. Patterson," David said, "I want you to meet some people." He gestured toward a group approaching them, officers from his current command, including his executive officer and department heads. "This is the woman who taught us that neighbors are family you get to choose." The introductions continued as more people approached. Marcus found himself in conversation with Commander Sarah Chen, who had driven down from Norfolk specifically for the ceremony. "I had to see this for myself," she explained. "In 15 years of service, I've never heard of one brother promoting another across service branches. It's the kind of story that becomes legend. It's the kind of story that reminds you why we serve," Marcus replied, watching David across the pier as he posed for photos with his new captain's insignia. "Not just for country, but for the people who matter most." Father Miguel appeared beside them, moving with the quiet authority that came from decades of providing comfort and guidance to military families. "Marcus, I married your parents 38 years ago. I baptized both you boys. I said your father's funeral mass. But this is one of the most beautiful things I've witnessed in all those years." "Why's that, Father?" "Because it's about love translating into action. David didn't just want his brother here. He wanted to honor the role you played in making this moment possible. And you didn't just show up. You participated in creating something neither of you will ever forget." As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself in dozens of conversations, each one adding another layer to his understanding of what David had orchestrated. This wasn't just a promotion ceremony. It was a celebration of family, of the bonds that hold people together through years of separation and the demands of military life. Captain Morrison approached as the reception was winding down. "Admiral Hayes, I hope you know that today will be talked about on this base for years to come. It's not often we get to witness something so meaningful. Thank you for making it possible, sir. I know this required some unconventional approvals." Morrison smiled. The best things usually do. Your brother made a compelling case, and frankly, after reviewing both your service records, it was an honor to facilitate this. As the sun began to set over the harbor, casting long shadows across the now mostly empty pier, Marcus and David found themselves alone for the first time since the morning's surprise had been revealed. "So," Marcus said as they walked along the pier, their dress shoes clicking rhythmically against the concrete, 6 months of planning. Who else was in on this conspiracy? David pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a group text thread titled Operation Big Brother. The participants list made Marcus laugh out loud. Captain Morrison, Captain Rodriguez, Commander Chen, Mrs. Patterson, Father Miguel, and at least a dozen other names he recognized. Even Sarah knew, David admitted. "I had to coordinate with her to make sure you could get leave on the right day. My wife was in on this and didn't tell me." Marcus shook his head in amazement. "I'm never going to hear the end of this." "She was the one who suggested I should make it a surprise rather than just asking you to come. She said you'd probably try to make it about me instead of accepting the honor yourself." They paused at the end of the pier, looking out over the harbor where several naval vessels were moored. The sight never got old for either of them. The clean lines of military ships, the precision of their arrangement, the quiet pride of a fleet ready for whatever mission might come. "David, can I ask you something?" "Assured." "Why now? Why this ceremony? You could have asked me to just be here as family." David was quiet for a long moment, watching a seagull dive for fish in the harbor. "Do you remember when I graduated from the academy?" "Of course." Mom was so proud she cried through the entire ceremony. "Do you remember what you told me afterward?" Marcus thought back 8 years to that hot June day at Annapolis, when David had walked across the stage to receive his commission as an ensign. He'd been so young then, so eager to prove himself worthy of the uniform he was putting on. "I told you that the hardest part was over, but the most important part was just beginning. You told me that every promotion, every advancement, every new responsibility was a chance to honor not just the Navy, but the people who believed in me enough to help me get there." David turned to face his brother. "You said that leadership wasn't about the rank on your collar, but about remembering that someone had faith in you before you had faith in yourself." Marcus felt a tightness in his chest. "I remember now. For 8 years, every time I faced a difficult decision, every time I had to choose between the easy path and the right one, I thought about that conversation. I thought about the example you set, not just as an officer, but as a brother who never once made me feel like I was competing with him for success." A group of junior officers walked past them, heading back toward the base proper. They nodded respectfully to both Marcus and David, and Marcus found himself wondering what stories they would tell about today. What version of this ceremony would make its way into base lore? "You know what's funny?" David continued. "I spent so many years trying to live up to your example that I forgot to appreciate what we have as brothers. I got so focused on making you proud professionally that I stopped making time for you personally." David, let me finish. "This ceremony having you promote me, it wasn't just about tradition or making a memorable moment. It was about saying thank you for 15 years of being the person I could count on, even when I wasn't good at staying in touch. It was about acknowledging that my success isn't separate from our relationship. It's built on it." The harbor was quiet now, with most of the ceremony attendees having departed. In the distance, Marcus could see the lights beginning to come on aboard the moored ships as evening watch rotations began. "You know what I realized today," Marcus said. "I've been just as guilty of letting the work take precedence over the relationship. I tell myself I'm proud of you. I tell Sarah how well you're doing, but I don't tell you often enough. We're both pretty bad at the touchy-feely stuff. Dad wasn't much better at it." "No, but he showed up when it mattered, just like you did today." They stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, two brothers in uniform watching the sun set over a harbor that had seen countless farewells and homecomings, countless ceremonies marking the passages of military careers. The drive back to the base hotel gave Marcus time to process the day's events. David had offered to let him stay at his house, but Marcus preferred the neutral territory of the hotel, especially since he had an early flight back to Washington the next morning. As he changed out of his dress uniform, he caught himself looking in the mirror at the reflection of a rear admiral who had just participated in something unprecedented in his military experience. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "I can't wait to hear everything. The photos David sent are incredible. So proud of both my boys." Marcus smiled at both my boys. Sarah had never had siblings of her own, but she'd adopted David as thoroughly as if he'd been born into their family. She was the one who remembered his birthday, who sent care packages during deployments, who had probably been more nervous about today's ceremony than either of the Hayes brothers. Before he could respond, another text came in from Commander Chen. "That was the most beautiful ceremony I've ever attended. The way you two looked at each other during the oath. I don't think there was a dry eye on the pier." Then one from Mrs. Patterson. "Thank you for letting an old woman be part of something so special. Your parents would be over the moon." And finally, one from David. "Room service dinner, room 412. We need to catch up properly." Marcus found himself knocking on David's door 20 minutes later, having changed into civilian clothes for the first time since arriving at the base. David answered wearing jeans and a navy t-shirt, looking more like the little brother Marcus remembered than the newly promoted captain from the afternoon ceremony. "I ordered way too much food," David said, gesturing toward a room service cart laden with what appeared to be half the hotel restaurant's menu. "I figured we might want to talk without worrying about time." They settled into the small seating area by the window, plates balanced on their laps, the harbor visible through the glass as lights began to twinkle across the water. "So," Marcus said, "tell me about the job. The real story, not the official version." David launched into a detailed account of his current command, a destroyer home-ported in Norfolk, with a crew of 320 sailors, and a mission set that kept them deployed 8 months out of every 18. He talked about the challenges of maintaining readiness while dealing with budget constraints, the satisfaction of watching junior officers develop into leaders, the weight of being responsible for so many lives and so much expensive equipment. "The hardest part," David said, "isn't the technical stuff, it's the human stuff. Making decisions that affect people's careers, their families, their futures. I find myself thinking about every conversation we ever had about leadership, every example you set when you didn't think anyone was watching." "What do you mean?" "Like when I was home on leave 3 years ago, and you spent your entire weekend helping that neighbor kid with his Naval Academy application. You didn't know him well. You had 100 other things you could have been doing, but you saw someone who needed guidance and you provided it. No fanfare, no expectation of credit or thanks. You just did it because it was the right thing to do." Marcus barely remembered the incident David was referring to, which was probably his brother's point. "That's just being a decent person. That's being a leader. And that's what I try to remember when I'm dealing with a sailor who's struggling, or making decisions about promotions, or trying to figure out how to balance mission requirements with taking care of my people." They talked for 2 hours, covering everything from David's upcoming deployment schedule to Marcus's own challenges managing Coast Guard operations in an era of budget uncertainty. It was the kind of conversation they'd been having in fragments over phone calls and text messages for years, but with the luxury of time and the comfort of being in the same room. "Marcus," David said as they were finishing the last of the dessert they'd ordered, "I want to ask you about something." "What's that?" "Are you happy? I mean really happy, not just professionally satisfied." The question caught Marcus off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Because I realized today that I don't actually know. I know you're successful, I know you're respected, I know Sarah adores you and you've built a good life. But I don't know if you're happy." Marcus considered the question seriously. "I think I am. I love the work most days. I love Sarah. I'm proud of what we've accomplished together. But if I'm being honest, there are times when I feel like I'm going through the motions." "How so?" The higher you go in rank, the further you get from the reasons you joined in the first place. More meetings, more politics, more time spent managing up instead of leading down. Some days I miss being a lieutenant when the job was simpler and the impact was more direct. David nodded thoughtfully. I worry about that, about losing sight of why this matters. Then you're already ahead of most people at your level. The next morning, Marcus found himself in the hotel restaurant earlier than planned, unable to sleep past dawn despite the emotional exhaustion of the previous day. David appeared 15 minutes later, looking like he'd slept about as well as Marcus had. "Coffee?" David asked, settling into the booth across from his brother. "About 3 cups worth," Marcus replied, signaling the waitress for a refill. They ordered breakfast and sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the harbor come to life as the morning watch change began aboard the moored vessels. Marcus found himself thinking about the drive ahead, the return to his regular duties, the reports and meetings and administrative responsibilities that would consume his attention for the next several weeks. "I need to tell you something," David said suddenly. "Something I probably should have mentioned yesterday." Marcus looked up from his coffee, nodding the serious tone in his brother's voice. "I'm being considered for a new assignment. It's not official yet, but Captain Morrison gave me a heads up. There's a possibility I might be selected for the Naval War College, then potentially a Pentagon posting." "David, that's incredible. That's a career-making opportunity." "It's also 3 years in Newport, then potentially 4 years in Washington, which means Sarah and I would be in the same city for the first time since." David paused, thinking. "Since before I took command." The implications hit Marcus immediately. For the past 8 years, he and David had managed their relationship around the reality of different duty stations, different deployment schedules, different demands on their time. The idea of being in the same city, of being able to have dinner regularly, of Sarah finally having her brother-in-law close by, it was both exciting and slightly overwhelming. "How do you feel about it?" Marcus asked. "Terrified," David admitted. "Not about the job. I think I'm ready for that level of responsibility. But about the idea of being close enough that we can't use distance as an excuse for not staying connected." Marcus understood exactly what his brother meant. Distance had been convenient in its way, allowing both of them to care deeply about each other while maintaining the emotional safety of separation. Regular contact would require a different kind of vulnerability, a different level of commitment to their relationship. "Sarah's going to be thrilled," Marcus said. "She's already planning dinner parties," David replied with a grin. "I made the mistake of mentioning the possibility, and she immediately started talking about Sunday dinners and birthday celebrations, and all the things we've missed out on." Their breakfast arrived, and they ate while discussing the logistics of David's potential move. Marcus found himself getting genuinely excited about the prospect of having his brother nearby, even as he recognized the adjustments it would require from both of them. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said as they were finishing their meal. "Of course." "Yesterday, when you were planning all of this, when you were coordinating with Sarah and Captain Morrison and everyone else, were you nervous? About how I'd react, I mean." David considered the question carefully. "Not nervous, exactly. But I was aware that I was asking you to step outside your comfort zone. Having you participate in the ceremony instead of just attending it, that was a risk. I knew you might prefer to just be there as family." "I'm glad you took the risk." "Why?" Marcus thought about how to articulate what he'd been feeling since the ceremony. "Because it forced me to think about our relationship differently. Not just as brothers who happen to both be in the military, but as people who have shaped each other's careers in ways we don't always acknowledge." "What do you mean?" "I mean that watching you take that oath yesterday, being the one to pin on your new rank, it made me realize that your success isn't separate from my pride in you. It's connected to it. And that's something worth celebrating, worth stepping outside comfort zones for." David smiled, the same smile that had gotten him out of trouble and into adventures throughout their childhood. "So you're saying my master plan worked?" "Your master plan?" "To remind you that we're not just colleagues who happen to be related. We're brothers who happen to be colleagues." Marcus laughed, recognizing the distinction. "Yeah, I guess it worked." They sat quietly for a few more minutes, watching the harbor activity and processing the implications of everything they'd discussed. Marcus felt a sense of completion, as if something that had been slightly out of alignment for years had finally clicked into place. "I should probably head to the airport soon," Marcus said eventually. "I know, but before you go, one more thing." David reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wrapped box. "I got you something. Call it a thank you gift." Marcus unwrapped the box to find a set of cufflinks, simple silver rectangles engraved with the Hayes family crest their father had researched years earlier. They were elegant without being flashy, the kind of thing Marcus would actually wear. "David, these are beautiful, but you didn't need to." "Read the inscription." Marcus turned one of the cufflinks over and found small text engraved on the back. "Hayes men show up." The other cufflink read, "June 29, 2025. "So you'll remember," David said simply. Marcus felt his throat tight with emotion for the second time in 24 hours. "I'm never going to forget this." "Good, because I'm planning to hold you to all those promises about staying connected." They stood, and Marcus found himself pulling his brother into a hug that lasted longer than their usual quick embraces. When they separated, both men had slightly damp eyes, but neither seemed embarrassed by the display of emotion. "Captain Hayes," Marcus said formally, then grinned. "I like the sound of that." "Rear Admiral Hayes," David replied. "I'm pretty fond of that one too." The flight back to Washington gave Marcus 3 hours to reflect on the whirlwind of the past day. As the plane climbed above the Virginia coastline, he found himself looking down at the naval installations scattered along the shore, each one representing thousands of stories like his and David's, families shaped by service, relationships tested and strengthened by the demands of military life. He pulled out his phone to text Sarah, "On my way home. Wait until you hear about everything, and thank you for keeping the secret." Her response came back immediately. "I'm so proud of both of you I could burst. Can't wait to hear every detail. David's sending me photos of the ceremony. You both look so handsome and official." The flight attendant offered him coffee, and Marcus accepted, thinking about the conversation he'd had with David about happiness and purpose. The ceremony had reminded him of something he'd lost sight of in the administrative complexity of senior leadership: the human connections that made the work meaningful, not just the abstract concept of service to country, but the concrete reality of service to the people who mattered most. His phone buzzed with a group text from the Operation Big Brother thread that David had shown him the night before. Mrs. Patterson had written, "Thank you all for letting me be part of something so special. Those boys have made their parents proud." Commander Chen had added, "Already looking forward to the next Hayes family milestone. What are we planning for Marcus's next promotion?" Captain Morrison chimed in, "Admiral Hayes, it was an honor hosting yesterday's ceremony. Your brother speaks of you often and with great pride. Now I understand why." Marcus found himself smiling as he typed a response. "Thank you all for making yesterday possible. David's secret conspiracy gave our family a memory we'll treasure forever." The messages continued throughout the flight: photos from the ceremony, comments about how moving the whole experience had been, plans for staying in touch. Marcus realized that David hadn't just orchestrated a promotion ceremony. He'd created a network of people who were now invested in their continued relationship. As the plane began its descent into Reagan National, Marcus's thoughts turned to the practical implications of David's potential move to Washington. Sarah had been talking for years about wanting more family nearby, about missing the casual dinners and spontaneous visits that came with proximity. The idea of being able to drive to David's house for Sunday dinner, of being present for the small moments as well as the major milestones, felt like a gift he hadn't realized he wanted.